My name is Carol, I'm 57 years old, and at my only son's funeral, I received a text message from him telling me he was alive. Before I tell you about how I exposed the monster who tried to kill him and took back my family, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The rain that day wasn't gentle. It was a cold, hateful downpour, the kind that feels like a judgment from God, soaking everything down to the bone. Each drop that hit the green tent above us sounded like a fist pounding on a coffin lid. My own son's coffin lid. The Ohio mud clung to my sensible black heels, trying to pull me down into the earth with him. I stood there, a statue of a mother, numb. The hollow ache in my chest had been my only companion for 2 weeks, ever since the police called about a fiery car crash on Route 80. A crash so severe, they said, that there wasn't much left to identify. But they had found something. Something they told me was my Michael. My only child. 27 years old. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, stood beside me, her perfectly manicured hand gripping my arm. Her shoulders shook with sobs that produced no tears. A performance worthy of an Oscar. She was the one who insisted on a closed casket. "It's too gruesome, Carol," she'd whispered, her voice a perfect imitation of heartbreak. "I want to remember him how he was." At the time I thought it was a mercy. Now I wasn't so sure. The pastor was droning on about ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The words were just noise, like static from a distant radio station. All around us, friends and family huddled under black umbrellas, their faces etched with pity. Pity for the poor, grieving mother. Pity for the young, heartbroken widow. If they only knew. And then it happened. A vibration. Low and insistent, from the pocket of my black wool coat. It was my phone. It felt like a sacrilege, a rude interruption to this sacred, awful moment. My first instinct was to silence it, to shove it deeper into my pocket. But some mechanical impulse took over. My hand, cold and stiff, pulled it out. I squinted at the screen, the bright light a shock in the gray gloom. An unknown number. And beneath it, a message. 5 words that shattered the world. "I'm alive. Don't trust Jessica." The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. My knuckles went white as I gripped the phone. It had to be a prank. A sick, twisted joke from some cruel teenager. Who would do such a thing? My thumb hovered over the delete button, my whole body trembling with a rage so cold it burned. But then, something impossible happened. Right before my eyes on the screen, the unknown number flickered. And it changed. The string of digits vanished, replaced by a name. Mikey Bear. A punch to the gut. It was a stupid, childish nickname I'd given him when he was 5 and had a teddy bear pajama set he refused to take off. A name he made me promise never to say in front of his friends. A name no one else on earth used for him. A name I hadn't typed into a phone in years, but was saved there. A digital ghost of his childhood. My blood ran cold. The pastor's voice faded away completely. The rhythmic drumming of the rain on the tent disappeared. The world narrowed to the small, glowing rectangle in my hand. He was alive. My son. My Michael. That meant the body in that polished mahogany box, the box they were now preparing to lower into the cold, wet ground, was not him. I looked up from the phone, my eyes locking onto Jessica. She had her head bowed, a lace handkerchief pressed to her eyes. The perfect mask of sorrow. But I saw it now. The slight, almost imperceptible tension in her jaw. The way her back was ramrod straight beneath her designer black dress. She wasn't grieving. She was waiting. The funeral home workers began to turn the cranks, the casket slowly descending. A collective sob went through the crowd. Jessica's wail rose above them all, a sharp, piercing sound that felt utterly fake. She knew. She knew my son wasn't in there. A wave of nausea and fury washed over me, so powerful I thought I might collapse right there in the mud. My fingers tightened on my phone. My mind raced, a whirlwind of terror and confusion. I had to do something. I had to say something. I opened my mouth, a scream building in my throat, ready to stop this entire charade. The world went silent. The casket was descending, but the only thing I could see were those words on my screen. Was this a cruel joke? Or was my son reaching out to me, begging for help, from somewhere beyond the grave? I didn't scream. I didn't faint. A strange, icy calm washed over me, the kind of clarity that comes in the moments before a car crash. I felt Jessica's grip on my arm, her fake sobs still vibrating through her body. I had to get away from her. Now, leaning heavily on my friend Linda's arm, I whispered, Linda, I don't feel well. The rain. I think I need to sit down. Her face immediately creased with concern. Of course, Carol. Let's get you to the car. Jessica chimed in, her voice dripping with saccharine sympathy. Oh, you poor thing. Let me come with you. No, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I softened it. No, thank you, dear. I just need a moment alone. Linda can help me. I could feel Jessica's eyes on my back as Linda and I walked away from the grave, our feet sinking into the soggy grass. She was probably relieved to have the stage to herself, to play the grieving widow for the assembled crowd. The moment the car door clicked shut, the dam broke. Not with tears but with ragged, desperate breaths. I fumbled in my purse for my reading glasses, my hands shaking so violently I could barely get them on my face. The phone screen was a blur. Mikey Bear. It was real. Carol, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost, Linda said, her hand on my shoulder. I couldn't tell her. Not yet. I couldn't trust anyone. Just grief, Linda. It comes in waves. She squeezed my shoulder, accepting the lie. She was a good friend. She stayed with me until the service was over and the crowds began to disperse, then drove her own car home, leaving me alone in the roaring silence of mine. The rain hammered against the windshield, each drop a tiny explosion. I stared at the message, reading it over and over. I'm alive. Don't trust Jessica. My mind was a maelstrom. If he was alive, where was he? Why was he hiding? And what had Jessica done? My thumbs, clumsy and trembling, tapped out a reply. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of hope and terror. I had to be sure. A mother knows. But in a world that had just turned upside down, I needed more. I needed proof that this wasn't some new diabolical level of torture. I wrote, Mikey, if this is really you, tell me what we buried in the time capsule under the old oak tree. It was our secret. A silly thing we'd done the summer before he left for college. We'd filled an old coffee can with mementos, things that represented his childhood. His first place science fair ribbon, a picture of his dog, Scout, and one other item. A ridiculous, embarrassing photo that he made me swear I'd never show anyone. Especially not a future wife. Jessica knew nothing about it. I hit send. The seconds that followed were the longest of my life. The 3 little dots that meant he was typing appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. My breath caught in my throat. Please God, please. Then the message came through. The picture of you in the pumpkin Halloween costume from 1998. You hated it because you said it made your butt look big. The tears finally came. Not the silent, dignified tears of a grieving mother, but wrenching, gut-punching sobs that tore their way up from the deepest part of my soul. I hunched over the steering wheel, the phone clutched in my hand like a lifeline, and I cried. I cried with relief so profound it felt like pain. I cried with rage so hot it felt like it could melt the windows. He was alive. My boy was alive. The funeral, the casket, the condolences, it was all a lie. A monstrous, elaborate lie. And Jessica was at the center of it. The grief I had been carrying for 2 weeks didn't just disappear. It transmuted into something harder, something sharper. It turned into fuel. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, my vision clearing. I had a million questions. Where was he? Was he safe? What did he need me to do? But as I looked across the parking lot, I saw Jessica walking toward her car, leaning on her brother Mark's arm, accepting hugs from relatives. Her performance was over. And a cold, terrifying realization washed over me as I watched her. My son was alive, but he was in hiding. And if he wasn't in that coffin, then who or what had we just buried? Driving home from the cemetery, the world outside my car seemed unreal, like a movie set. The familiar streets of Maple Creek, the cozy houses with their porch swings and flower beds, all looked strange, tainted by the lie I now carried. My own home, the place where I had raised Michael, felt like a stranger's house. Every photo on the wall, every memory, was now cast in a sinister new light. My mind kept replaying my life from the day Michael brought Jessica home. He was a junior in college then, studying engineering, full of passion and bright ideas. He'd met her in a journalism class. She was beautiful, I had to admit that. Sharp, witty, with a smile that could charm anyone. But it never quite reached her eyes. Her eyes were like a shark's, dark, watchful, and constantly calculating. I remember that first dinner. She wore a red dress a little too tight, and lipstick the color of blood. She'd peppered my late husband and me with questions that felt less like polite conversation and more like an interrogation. She wanted to know about our finances, about Michael's college fund, about the value of our house. At one point she'd laughed and said, "You have to be smart about these things. A good salary is one thing, but generational wealth is the real goal." I'd exchanged a look with my husband then, a silent flicker of unease passing between us, but Michael was smitten. "She challenges me," he'd said later. "She's ambitious." I liked that. After they got married 2 years later, things changed. Subtly at first. Jessica became the gatekeeper to my son. Phone calls were shorter. Visits became less frequent. "Michael's just so busy with his promotion," she'd say, her voice syrupy sweet. "You know how it is." But I knew my son. He would never be too busy for his mother. Then came the bruises. I remember one Sunday dinner, he was wearing a short-sleeved shirt, and I saw a dark, ugly mark on his upper arm, the distinct shape of fingerprints. My heart had leaped into my throat. "Michael, what on earth happened to your arm?" He'd flinched, pulling his sleeve down. Jessica had laughed, a tinkling sound that didn't match the hardness in her eyes. "Oh, that. He's so clumsy. Walked right into a doorframe yesterday, didn't you, honey?" Michael had just nodded, his gaze fixed on his plate. "Yeah, Mom. Just clumsy." But the explanation felt wrong. It was a lie and I knew it. I'd wanted to press him, to pull him aside and demand the truth. But I didn't. I was afraid of pushing him away, of being the meddling mother-in-law. It's a regret I will carry with me to my grave. I chose peace over truth, and my son almost paid the price for it. I pulled into my driveway and just sat in the car, the engine off, the silence buzzing in my ears. The front door of my house looked like a gaping mouth. Inside, the house was filled with flowers from the funeral, their sweet scent now cloying and sickening. On the mantelpiece was a photo of Michael and Jessica on their wedding day. He looked so happy, so full of hope. She was smiling, but her eyes were looking straight at the camera, triumphant like a hunter posing with her prize. I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck. I had seen the signs. The little lies, the possessiveness, the strange obsession with money, the bruises. They were all there, puzzle pieces I hadn't known how to put together. But now, with that one text message, the picture was horrifyingly clear. Jessica hadn't just married my son. She had targeted him. I had let a viper into my home, into my family. I had stood by and watched as she coiled herself around my only child. At that moment I thought that was the worst of it, that she was just a greedy, manipulative woman. I was wrong. I had no idea how deep her evil ran, or what she was truly capable of. And I had no idea that I was now her next target. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and coded communication. I lived with my phone in my hand, my heart leaping at every buzz and chime. I went through the motions of a grieving mother, accepting casseroles from neighbors and answering condolence calls, all while a silent, frantic conversation was happening via text with my son. He couldn't call. It wasn't safe. He explained that Jessica had eyes and ears everywhere. He was hiding, moving between cheap, anonymous motels on the outskirts of the city. The messages came in short, clipped bursts painting a terrifying picture. "She tried to kill me, Mom." This wasn't the first time. He told me about the accidents. A faulty wire in the bathroom that gave him a nasty shock. A gas leak from the stove that he'd caught just in time. The time his brakes felt spongy, but the mechanic couldn't find anything wrong. Each time Jessica had an explanation. Each time she dismissed his fears, calling him paranoid. She was gaslighting him, making him question his own sanity, all while she was slowly, methodically trying to murder him. The final attempt was the car crash. She had cut his brake line herself. He'd realized it too late, as he was heading down a steep hill on the highway. He'd managed to swerve off the road and crash into a ditch before hitting anyone else. The car had caught fire, but he'd been thrown clear. He'd come to in the darkness, bruised and bleeding, and had known with chilling certainty that if he went home, he wouldn't survive the night. So he ran. He'd called the one person he knew he could trust, an old friend from college named Kevin, who had picked him up and helped him disappear. Then a new message popped up on my screen. It was a picture. My hand flew to my mouth. It was blurry, taken in what looked like a dim motel room. But it was him. It was Michael. He was so much thinner, his face gaunt and shadowed with a patchy beard. A nasty healing cut ran across his forehead. But his eyes, they were the same. My son's eyes. They were filled with fear, but also with a fierce, burning determination. I stared at that picture, tears blurring my vision. It was a horrible, beautiful sight. My son was alive, but he was a ghost, a hunted man. I knew I couldn't just sit here and wait. This wasn't a time for grief anymore. This was a time for war. And if you're listening to this and you've ever felt that switch flip inside you from victim to fighter, you know what I'm talking about. Stay with me, because what Jessica did next was even more evil than trying to kill my son. She tried to erase me. I started digging. I went online searching for anything I could find. Public records, social media, news articles. It didn't take long to find the cracks in Jessica's perfect facade. She had a mountain of debt from before she even met Michael. Credit cards, student loans, a car repossession. It was all there, hidden behind the perfect life she had built with my son's money. Then I found it. The key. A public notice in a small online business journal. A new life insurance policy had been taken out on Michael. The beneficiary. His loving wife, Jessica. The amount, $2 million. The date the policy became active. Just 6 weeks before the crash. It felt like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a crime of passion or greed. This was a calculated, cold-blooded business transaction. My son's life had a price tag. My fingers flew across the keyboard of my phone, sending the screenshot to Michael. His reply came back almost instantly. I knew it. Mom, you need to be careful. She's watching you. She'll do anything to protect that money. His warning sent a shiver down my spine, but it was too late. I had already made myself a target. I just didn't realize that the first attack wouldn't be a physical one. It would be an attack on my mind, on my credibility. An attack designed to make sure that no one would ever believe a single word I said. I thought I was being subtle. I started making quiet phone calls to old family friends, to people who had known Jessica back in college. I framed my questions carefully. I'm just trying to piece things together. I'd say, my voice trembling for effect. Did Jessica ever mention having money troubles? Most people were tight-lipped, uncomfortable speaking ill of the recent widow. But I was planting seeds of doubt. At least I thought I was. What I didn't realize was that Jessica was doing the same thing, only she was much better at it. The attack came on a Tuesday afternoon. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Jessica standing on my porch. And she wasn't alone. My older sister Martha was with her. Jessica's eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, a fresh set of tears glistening on her cheeks. Martha just looked worried. "Carol, can we come in?" Martha asked, her voice gentle. My stomach twisted into a knot. I stepped aside and they walked into my living room, the one filled with photos of the son Jessica had tried to murder. Jessica sank onto the sofa and buried her face in her hands. "Oh, Carol," she sobbed. "I'm so worried about you." I just stood there, my arms crossed. "Worried about me? Why?" Martha put a comforting hand on Jessica's back before turning to me. "Honey," Jessica called me. She told me you've been making some strange phone calls. That you're not accepting Michael's death." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was happening. She was twisting my investigation into a symptom of madness. "I'm worried you're having some kind of breakdown," Jessica said, looking up at me with those big, false, tear-filled eyes. "You've been telling people that Michael is still alive, that there's some kind of conspiracy. Carol, it's the grief talking. It's making you see things, believe things that aren't true." My own sister looked at me with such pity, it made my skin crawl. "Carol, we all loved him. But you have to let him go. This isn't healthy." I was floored. I opened my mouth to argue, to tell them the truth, to show them the texts. But I stopped myself. They wouldn't believe me. Jessica had already poisoned the well. She had laid the perfect trap, using my own family against me. If I showed them the text, they'd say I was delusional, that I was being catfished by a cruel prankster, or worse, that I was making it all up. Jessica stood up and walked over to me, placing a cold hand on my arm. "I've been talking to a doctor," she said, her voice a low conspiratorial whisper. "He specializes in grief counseling. And I also spoke with our family lawyer. He said we might need to look into a conservatorship just for a little while. To manage your finances, your estate. To make sure you're taken care of until you're well again. There it was. The end game. It wasn't just about the insurance money. It was about everything. My house. My savings. My inheritance from my late husband. She wanted to have me declared legally incompetent. She wanted to lock me away in a mental institution while she walked away with every penny our family had ever worked for. I pulled my arm away from her as if I'd been burned. "Get out," I said, my voice a low growl. "Carol, please," Martha started. "Both of you. Get out of my house. Now." They left, casting worried glances back at me. The moment the door closed, I slid down the wall and sat on the floor, my heart pounding with a terror I had never known. She wasn't just trying to bury my son. She was trying to bury me too. And she was using my own love for him as the shovel. The gaslighting attack was a wake-up call. I was playing checkers while Jessica was playing chess. My subtle phone calls were no match for her vicious, calculated campaign to paint me as a grieving, hysterical mother who had lost her mind. I had to change my tactics. I had to fight fire with fire. I called Jessica the next morning. I forced myself to cry, to sound broken and defeated. "Jessica, you were right," I sobbed into the phone. I think I need help. My sister was right. I'm not well." I could almost hear the triumphant smirk in her voice when she replied, "Oh, Carol, I'm so glad you're realizing it. It's the first step to healing. I'm going to go away for a little while," I said. "To a wellness retreat up in the mountains. I need to clear my head. I'm turning off my phone. I need to be alone." "That's a wonderful idea," she said, the relief in her voice palpable. "You take all the time you need." She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully neutralized me. But I wasn't driving to a wellness retreat. I packed a small bag, withdrew several $1,000s in cash from my bank account, and drove 2 hours in the opposite direction, to the city. I checked into a nondescript hotel near the airport and bought a burner phone from a convenience store. My first call on the new phone was to Michael. I told him what Jessica had done. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard him swear. A low, vicious sound. "I should have known she'd stoop that low," he said, his voice raw with anger. "Mom, this is getting too dangerous." "It's too late for that, Mikey," I told him. "She's not just coming for your memory. She's coming for me. We have to stop her." I knew I couldn't do it alone. The police wouldn't believe a crazy old woman. I needed a professional. I needed someone who operated in the gray areas, someone who wouldn't be put off by the official story. I spent the next day holed up in my hotel room, scouring the internet for the best private investigator in the state. I found him. His name was Frank, a grizzled ex-cop with a reputation for being relentless and discreet. I met him in a greasy spoon diner, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and watery coffee. I laid out the whole story, my voice low and urgent. I showed him the picture of Michael on my burner phone. I expected him to be skeptical, to look at me with the same pity my sister had. Instead, he just listened, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, he took a long sip of his coffee. $2 million is a hell of a motive," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "But it's your word against a grieving widow's. I'm going to need more than a text message." "Then get it," I said, pushing a thick envelope of cash across the table. "Find out everything you can about her. Her finances, her friends, her past. And find out who was in charge of my son's accident investigation." Frank got to work immediately. For the next week, he was my lifeline. He'd call me on the burner phone with updates. The picture he painted of Jessica was even uglier than I had imagined. She wasn't just in debt. She was drowning in it. She had secret credit cards, offshore accounts, and a history of manipulating people for money. Then for days later, Frank called with the bombshell. "I got the police report from the crash," he said, his voice tight. "It was closed awfully quick. Ruled a single vehicle accident due to driver error. The lead officer on the scene, the one who signed off on the report. You're not going to like this, Carol." My heart hammered in my chest. "Who was it, Frank?" "His name is Officer Mark Stanton," he said. "He's Jessica's older brother." The pieces were falling into place. forming a picture more monstrous than I could have ever imagined. This wasn't just Jessica. It was a family affair. They were in this together. The next step was to find the one person who could confirm it all. And I knew with a terrifying certainty that I was going to have to face him myself. Knowing Mark was involved changed everything. It wasn't just a wife trying to kill her husband anymore. It was a conspiracy. My plan to stay hidden in the city felt flimsy, foolish even. They knew I was suspicious. How long would it be before Jessica's concern for my mental health turned into something more sinister? I drove home under the cover of darkness, my headlights cutting through the inky blackness of the country roads. I didn't turn on any lights when I got inside. I just sat in my dark living room, the silence of the house pressing in on me. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the leaves outside, sounded like a threat. I was living in a prison of my own making, a prisoner in the home where I had raised my son. The irony was suffocating. I spent the next 2 days like a ghost, peeking through the blinds, my heart leaping into my throat every time a car drove down my street. I knew I couldn't live like this. Fear was its own kind of cage, and I refused to be locked in it. I had to make a move. I had to rattle their cage. Using my burner phone, I sent a simple, anonymous text to Mark's personal cell number. It was just 2 words, Route 80. I didn't know what I expected. A panic phone call? A denial? I got nothing. The silence was more unnerving than any reply. Had he even gotten it? Did he think it was a wrong number? The answer came that night. It was just after 10 o'clock. A storm was rolling in, the sky lit up by distant flashes of lightning. I was in the kitchen making a cup of tea, my back to the glass patio doors. A sudden, loud knock on the front door made me jump, sloshing hot water onto my hand. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears like a drum. I wasn't expecting anyone. I crept to the front window, my body trembling, and peered through a gap in the curtains. A dark sedan was parked in my driveway, its engine off. There was a man standing on my porch, his silhouette illuminated by a flash of lightning. It was him. It was Mark. My first instinct was to hide, to pretend I wasn't home. But a different feeling took over. A cold, hard anger. This was my house. I would not be intimidated in my own home. I took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it. He wasn't in uniform. He was wearing jeans and a dark hoodie, his hands shoved into his pockets. The friendly, smiling face from family barbecues was gone. In its place was a cold, hard mask. His eyes, so much like his sister's, were devoid of any warmth. "Evening, Carol," he said, his voice casual, but his eyes were anything but. "Saw the lights on. Just wanted to see how you were holding up." It was a lie. He knew I was supposed to be at a retreat. He was here because of my text. He was here to deliver a message. "I'm managing," I said, my voice steady, my hand gripping the doorknob so tightly my knuckles were white. I did not invite him in. He rocked back on his heels, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "You know," he said, his voice dropping lower, "sometimes grief does funny things to people. Makes them see things that aren't there. Makes them reach out to people they shouldn't." He took a step closer, his voice barely a whisper. "It's best to let sleeping dogs lie. For everyone's sake. Let Michael rest in peace." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat, clear and unmistakable, delivered on my own doorstep. He turned and walked away without another word, melting back into the darkness. I locked the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. The fear was real, a living thing in the room with me. I spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair in my living room, a heavy fireplace poker in my lap, watching the shadows dance on the walls. The next morning I went out to my car to get the newspaper. And I saw it. A long deep gash running the entire length of my front driver's side tire. It was completely flat. They knew I was digging. The message was clear: stop or you'll be next. But they had made a critical mistake. They thought fear would make me back down. They didn't know that for a mother fighting for her child, fear is just another word for fuel. The slash tire was a declaration of war. They were no longer content to manipulate me from a distance. They were bringing the threat right to my door. I knew then that I couldn't keep fighting from the shadows. I needed an ally, someone with the power to fight back, someone who already had a reason to despise the Stanton family. I needed Detective Miller. Frank, my PI, had mentioned Miller's name in passing. He was the one who had run the internal affairs investigation that got Mark kicked off the force for corruption a few years back. The official story was about taking kickbacks, but Frank had hinted that Miller always suspected it was something deeper, something dirtier. The case had been shut down from above before he could prove it. Miller had retired shortly after, bitter and disillusioned. It took me 2 days to find him. He wasn't in the phone book. He lived off the grid in a small rustic cabin on the shores of Lake Erie, about a 3-hour drive from my house. When I pulled up the long gravel driveway, he was sitting on his porch in a rocking chair, a shotgun resting across his lap, watching me with suspicion. He was older than I expected, with a face like a roadmap of long, hard years and eyes the color of a stormy sky. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a low growl. He didn't move from his chair. "Detective Miller?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "My name is Carol. Frank sent me. I need to talk to you about Mark Stanton." His eyes narrowed. He was silent for a long moment, studying me. Then he nodded slowly toward the other rocking chair on the porch. "You've got 10 minutes. I sat down, my nerves frayed. I laid out the entire story, starting with the funeral and the text message. I told him about the insurance policy, the closed casket, Jessica's gaslighting, the threat on my doorstep, the slashed tire. I could see the skepticism in his face, the look of a man who had heard 1,000 wild stories in his career. But then I took out my burner phone and showed him the picture of Michael. I showed him the text about the time capsule. I could see the shift in his expression. The skepticism didn't disappear, but something else flickered to life in his eyes. Curiosity. "And you're sure this isn't some sick prank?" he asked, his voice still rough. "A mother knows," I said simply. "And a mother knows when someone is trying to hurt her child." I pushed a file folder across the small porch table toward him. It contained everything Frank had dug up. The $2 million insurance policy, copies of Jessica's spiraling debts, and the official police report from the crash, signed by her brother Mark. Miller picked up the police report. He read it silently, his jaw tightening. He flipped to the last page, staring at Mark's signature. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "That son of a bitch," he muttered. I knew he was dirty. They shut me down before I could nail his hide to the wall. He looked up at me, and for the first time the storm in his eyes cleared. He saw me. He saw a mother fighting, not a crazy woman grieving. He saw a loose thread from his own past, a case that had haunted his retirement. At the same time, a text came through on my burner phone. It was from Michael. "Mom, I've been talking to Kevin. He's my old roommate, the cybersecurity guy. He thinks he can get into Jessica's cloud account. He's in." I showed the message to Miller. A slow smile spread across his weathered face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just caught the scent of its prey. He leaned back in his rocking chair, the wood groaning in protest. He looked out at the calm gray water of the lake, but I knew he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing a chessboard, and the pieces were finally moving into place. He looked back at me, the smile gone, replaced by a look of cold, hard purpose. "I always knew that family was rotten to the core," he said. "Let's go fishing, Carol. And let's use Jessica as bait." Following Miller's advice, I stayed away from home. He was convinced my house was being watched, my phone possibly tapped. I spent the next 2 days in that same dreary motel room, the walls closing in on me, waiting. The waiting was the hardest part. It was a constant, gnawing anxiety, a fear that Jessica would make another move, that something would go wrong, that Michael would be discovered. Then on the third night, a text came through on the burner phone. "Motel 39. Off Route 8. Room 112. Come alone. Now." My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. I scribbled a note for Miller, telling him where I was going, and slipped it under the door of his room. He had insisted on taking the room next to mine. I didn't wait for a reply. I got in my car and drove, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, my eyes scanning the rearview mirror with every turn. Motel 39 was one of those forgotten places on the edge of town, the kind of place where hope goes to die. The flickering neon sign cast a sickly red glow on the peeling paint and the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. I parked under a sputtering fluorescent light and killed the engine. The The silence was deafening. I walked to room 112, my footsteps echoing in the damp night air. My hand trembled as I raised it to knock. Before my knuckles could touch the wood, the door creaked open. He stood in the shadows of the doorway, a figure in a hooded sweatshirt, his face obscured. He was thinner than I remembered, and he moved with a slight limp, but I knew that posture, that tilt of his head. I would know him anywhere. "Mikey," I whispered, my voice breaking. He stepped into the light and pulled down the hood. My breath caught in my chest. It was him. Oh God, it was him. His face was gaunt, a map of exhaustion and fear. The cut on his forehead was now a raw red scar. But his eyes, they were my son's eyes. He was alive. We didn't say anything. We just fell into each other's arms, clinging to each other like two people drowning. I buried my face in his chest, inhaling the familiar scent of him, my tears soaking his sweatshirt. He held me so tight I could barely breathe, his own body shaking with silent sobs. For the first time in weeks, the hollow ache in my chest was filled. My son was home. He was in my arms. We finally pulled apart, and he led me inside the small, sterile room. We sat on the edge of the cheap motel bed, our hands still clasped together. "I was so scared, Mom," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know what to do." And then he told me everything. The story poured out of him, a torrent of lies and betrayal. It was worse than I had imagined. Jessica wasn't just in debt. She was involved in a sophisticated identity theft ring, run out of the investment firm where she worked. She was stealing the financial data of wealthy clients and selling it on the dark web. It was a multi-million-dollar operation. Mark, with his police connections, helped her cover her tracks. Michael had stumbled upon it by accident, seeing an encrypted file on her laptop that she'd forgotten to close. He'd confronted her. At first, she'd tried to seduce him into silence, promising him a cut of the money, a life of luxury. When he'd refused, threatening to go to the police, she'd turned on him. "I told her I wanted a divorce," he said, his voice cracking. "I think that's when she knew she had to get rid of me. Permanently." The accident started the next day. He had survived the final attempt on his life by pure dumb luck. He'd been hiding ever since, terrified that she would find him and finish the job. He had watched his own funeral via a live stream that Kevin had set up, a surreal, horrifying experience. "But the body, Michael?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Who was in the casket?" He looked away, his jaw tight. "That's the worst part, Mom." He told me that Mark had access to the county morgue. There was a John Doe, a homeless man who had died of an overdose a few weeks earlier, with no family to claim him. Mark had switched the paperwork, falsified the dental records, and cremated the man's actual remains. The body we had buried, the body that was now lying in the family plot under his name, was a stranger. A forgotten man used as a pawn in Jessica's sick game. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to grip the edge of the bed to steady myself. The sheer, cold-blooded depravity of it was staggering. My son had been erased, replaced by an innocent stranger. Also, his wife could cash in a life insurance policy and continue her criminal enterprise. A hard, cold resolve settled in my bones. This wasn't just about getting my son back. This was about justice. Justice for Michael, and justice for the nameless man they had discarded like trash. A line had been crossed, and now there was no turning back. We were going to burn their whole world to the ground. When I returned to my own motel room and told Miller the whole story, including the horrifying detail about the John Doe from the morgue, his face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "That's not just insurance fraud and attempted murder," he growled. "That's desecration of a corpse, obstruction of justice, and a dozen other felonies. They're going down, Carol. All of them." He agreed with my gut feeling. Jessica was the queen, but Mark was the key. He was the weak link, the one with a conscience, however buried it might be. "Jessica's a sociopath," Miller said, pacing the small room. "She'll never flip. But Mark, he was a cop once. He's in over his head. He's scared. We can use that." We couldn't approach him with threats. He was already being threatened by his sister. We needed a different angle. We needed to appeal to the man he used to be, not the criminal he had become. It was my idea to use the photo. I remembered it from years ago, tucked away in an old album. It took me a full day of driving back to my house, After Miller had done a thorough sweep for bugs and found none, and searching through dusty boxes in the attic, but I found it. It was a faded Polaroid from a summer day at Lake Erie, almost 15 years ago. A skinny, freckle-faced Michael and a slightly older, equally skinny Mark were holding up a stringer of perch, grinning proudly at the camera. They looked like what they were. Just kids happy and carefree long before the world had poisoned them. I knew Mark's habits. He still had lunch at the same little diner in his old neighborhood every Thursday. It was a place with red checkered tablecloths and a waitress who called everyone Han. That Thursday, I walked in and found him sitting in a booth by himself, hunched over a plate of meatloaf. He looked up when I approached, and for a second I saw raw panic in his eyes. He thought I was there to confront him, to scream at him. He started to stand up. "Sit down, Mark," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm not here to cause a scene. I just want to talk." He sank back into the booth, his eyes darting around the diner. I slid in across from him. I didn't say anything. I just took the old Polaroid from my purse and slid it across the table. He stared at it. His tough guy facade crumbled. I saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. He picked up the photo, his thumb gently stroking the image of his younger self. "We caught so many that day," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Your husband taught me how to bait a hook." "He was very fond of you, Mark," I said softly. "He thought you were a good kid. He would be so disappointed." That did it. His shoulders slumped in defeat. He looked up at me, and his eyes were swimming with tears. "I never wanted any of this to happen," he said, his voice cracking. "I swear. I got into some trouble. Gambling debts. Bad ones. Jessica found out. She said she could make it all go away. I didn't know what she was planning, not at first. By the time I realized how far she was willing to go, I was in too deep. She owns me, Carol. She'll ruin me. Or worse. She's going to do that anyway, Mark," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "You know she is. People like her, they don't have partners. They just have tools. And when they're done with a tool, they throw it away." I leaned forward. "This is your one chance to get out. Your one chance to do the right thing. Not for me. Not for Michael. For that kid right there." I tapped the photo. "Help us, Mark. Help us stop her." He stared at the photo for a long time, his jaw working. I could see the war raging inside him. It was a long shot. A gamble based on a mother's intuition and a faded photograph. Finally, he looked up, his eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of fear and resolve. He nodded, a single sharp jerk of his head. "Okay," he whispered. "I'll do it. I'll wear a wire. But you have to promise me, you have to get me out. You have to protect me from her." He agreed to help, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely put the photo down. He was terrified of his own sister. We had our inside man, but I had a chilling thought as I watched him. Would he survive long enough to expose her? The next 48 hours were the most nerve-wracking of my life. Miller moved fast, coordinating with a contact he trusted at the FBI. This was bigger than a local police matter now. It was interstate wire fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The feds wanted Jessica, and they wanted her badly. The plan was set for Saturday night. Kevin, Michael's brilliant friend, had been monitoring Jessica's communications. She had scheduled a meeting with a buyer for her stolen financial data. The buyer was flying in from out of state, and the meeting was set to take place at a secluded, luxury lake house an hour outside the city, a property owned by one of her shell corporations. It was the perfect private location for a multi-million-dollar criminal transaction. It was also the perfect trap. On Saturday evening, I sat with Michael and Kevin in a white windowless surveillance van parked in the woods, about a quarter-mile from the lake house. The van was filled with monitors, the air thick with tension and the low hum of electronics. Miller was in another vehicle with the FBI tactical team, closer to the house, listening in. On one screen, I could see a live feed from the hidden cameras Kevin had hacked into. I saw the plush white carpets, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark water, the roaring fireplace. It looked like a scene from a magazine. On another monitor, a little green line pulsed with every sound picked up by the tiny microphone taped to Mark's chest. His heartbeat was a frantic, terrified rhythm. My own heart was pounding in sync with it. I watched as Mark, looking pale and sweaty, let Jessica and her buyer into the house. The buyer was a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. Jessica was radiant, dressed in a shimmering silver dress, laughing and pouring champagne. She looked like a queen in her castle, completely untouchable. I watched them make small talk. My son sat beside me, his body rigid, his eyes glued to the screen showing the woman who had tried to kill him. I reached out and took his hand. It was ice cold. "It's almost over," I whispered. The buyer finally got down to business. "The account is ready for the transfer," he said. "Are you sure there are no loose ends? The source of this data is secure." Jessica took a delicate sip of her champagne and laughed, a sound that was both beautiful and utterly chilling. "The source," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "was my husband. He was a sentimental fool. A loose end that has been neatly tied up." The buyer raised an eyebrow. "Tied up?" Jessica swirled the champagne in her glass, a smug smile playing on her lips. "Let's just say he's in a place where he can't talk. A cold, hard place 6 feet under the ground." She looked directly at her brother. "Isn't that right, Mark? My dear husband is resting in peace." On the audio feed, I could hear Mark's ragged breath. "Yeah, Jess. He's gone." That was the signal. But Jessica wasn't done. She turned back to the buyer, her eyes glittering with malice. "The idiot had no idea what I was capable of. He actually thought he could divorce me and walk away. He found out the hard way that no one walks away from me." In the van, Miller's voice crackled over the radio. "That's it. We've got what we need. All teams move in. Now." I held my breath. On the screen, I saw the front and back doors of the lake house burst open simultaneously. Men in black tactical gear swarmed into the room, guns raised. "FBI. Nobody move." The look on Jessica's face was a masterpiece. The smug, triumphant mask shattered, replaced by pure, slack-jawed shock. Her champagne glass slipped from her fingers and crashed to the floor. For a split second, her eyes met the hidden camera, and it felt like she was looking right at me. She knew. Somehow she knew this was my doing. Her head whipped around to Mark, who was standing with his hands in the air, a look of sheer terror and relief on his face. The betrayal in her eyes was venomous. The doors burst open, and the look of shock on Jessica's face as she saw Detective Miller, a man she thought was a forgotten relic, stride into the room was something I would cherish for the rest of my life. The trap had sprung. The queen had fallen. The aftermath was a slow, complicated process of dismantling the web of lies Jessica had so carefully woven. She, Mark, and their entire network were arrested. The case was a media sensation for a while, the Black Widow of the Midwest. The papers called her. She never showed an ounce of remorse. During the trial, she sat there with the same cold defiance, trying to manipulate the jury with her tears. It didn't work. She was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mark, for his cooperation, received a much lighter sentence. He would be out in a few years. I don't know if I can ever forgive him, but I understand him. Fear makes people do terrible things. The legal process of bringing Michael back to life was a bureaucratic nightmare. It took months of court dates, DNA tests, and endless paperwork to convince the government that the man they had declared dead was very much alive. The $2 million insurance policy, which Jessica had already tried to claim, was frozen and eventually returned to the company. The whole sordid affair was finally over. But the scars remain. Trauma isn't like a broken bone that heals clean. It leaves jagged edges. Michael is home now, living with me in the house he grew up in. He's safe. But the man who came back is not the same one who left. He's quieter, more watchful. Loud noises make him jump. He still has nightmares. He started teaching a robotics class at the local community college, finding a quiet satisfaction in building things that follow logical rules, things he can control. Some nights we sit on the back porch drinking hot cocoa just like we did when he was a boy. We don't talk much. We don't have to. We just sit together in the quiet darkness, watching the fireflies, and we heal. His scar on his forehead still aches when it rains, a permanent reminder of how close we came to losing everything. As for me, I've learned that grief isn't always what it seems. Sometimes it's a placeholder for the truth. And I've learned that a mother's instinct is the most powerful force in the universe. It's a quiet whisper in the dark, A gut feeling that tells you when something is wrong. I listened to that whisper, and it saved my son's life. They tried to bury my son. They tried to bury me. But they didn't realize that they weren't burying seeds. We were survivors. And out of the cold, dark earth of their betrayal, we found our way back to the sun. Thank you for listening to my story. I wanted to share it because I know I'm not the only one who has felt unheard or underestimated. My question for you is this. Have you ever had a gut feeling, an instinct so strong that you had to act on it, even when the world told you that you were wrong? Please share your own stories in the comments below. I believe our stories have power, and they deserve to be heard. And if my story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more.